The Boston Marathon is one of the most traditional and respected races in the world, considered a true symbol of endurance, determination, and passion for sports. Since its first edition in 1897, it has established itself as the oldest continuous marathon on the planet, attracting professional and amateur athletes who dream of running through Boston's historic streets. In addition to competitors, thousands of fans attend every year to witness this grand event, either along the city streets or by watching it on television. In 2013, expectations were high, as the marathon featured important names from the international athletic scene, as well as inspiring stories of ordinary people who had trained for months to participate. The city was filled with positive energy, with streets decorated, volunteers positioned at strategic points, and an atmosphere of unity and outdoor celebration. Merchants took advantage of the occasion to sell related products. Restaurants offered special promotions, and tourists packed hotels to experience this unique moment. Many spectators occupied sidewalks near the finish line early, securing the best spots to see athletes complete the 42-kilometer race. Children played, families recorded happy moments, and photographers captured images of pure emotion among those present. It was a perfect day for sports. Blue skies, pleasant temperatures, and a festive atmosphere in the air. No one imagined that, just a few hours later, that peaceful landscape would give way to one of the saddest pages in recent American history. Local authorities had a full security plan in place, as in any large public event, but nothing could prepare the city for what was about to happen. Tension, however, was not yet part of the environment. At that moment, everything seemed to proceed normally, like in any other edition of the marathon. For those present on those busy streets, the focus was only on the strength of the athletes and the collective energy that filled the area. But, without knowing it, each person there was about to live an unforgettable and tragic experience that would shake America. And it was exactly in that seemingly calm scenario that, at 2:50 p.m. local time, the first explosion would change Boston's history forever. At the exact moment clocks marked 2:50 p.m. on April 15, 2013, a thunderous blast cut through the air on the busy Boylston Street near the finish line of the Boston Marathon, turning the atmosphere of sporting celebration into absolute chaos. The explosion came without warning, emerging from a backpack abandoned near the building housing the Marathon sports store, leaving everyone in shock. The noise was so intense it could be heard several blocks away, and the force of the detonation hurled debris and particles in all directions, hitting people nearby. Instantly, screams filled the area while thick smoke rose into the sky and bodies lay on the ground among pieces of clothing, shoes, and blood spilled across the asphalt. Many present initially believed it was some kind of accident, perhaps something related to the event infrastructure, but soon realized it was much more serious. Just 12 seconds after the first explosion, a second bomb also detonated, further amplifying the panic and increasing the number of victims. The images captured by surveillance cameras and smartphones of the spectators would later show the exact moment when normal life in Boston was brutally interrupted. While first aid was being administered by volunteer doctors and firefighters who were on site, the flow of information about what had happened began spreading like wildfire. Newspapers, TV networks, and news websites interrupted their regular programming to broadcast live footage of the desperate scenes unfolding in the historic city. Witnesses would later report that many runners had already crossed the finish line, but others were still heading toward the end of the race when everything happened. Among the injured were children, elderly people, and tourists from around the world who had come simply to experience a bit of American culture. Some injuries were extremely severe, including limb loss, heavy bleeding, and internal damage caused by the pressure of the explosions. Hospitals in the region went into maximum alert, mobilizing medical teams to receive hundreds of victims arriving in ambulances, private cars, and even walking. Despite the initial confusion, healthcare professionals acted quickly, organizing triage and prioritizing the most critical cases amid the unprecedented emergency. At that moment, what had once been an afternoon of sport and unity had transformed into a warlike scene, with visible destruction both in the streets and on people's faces. In the minutes that followed the explosions, confusion reigned. No one knew exactly what had happened, but everyone felt that this was not a common accident. Local authorities began arriving at the scene within minutes, including agents from the Boston Police Department, medical emergency teams, and representatives from the FBI, which would quickly take over the investigation. The governor of Massachusetts, Deval Patrick, was among the first to publicly declare that this appeared to be an act of terrorism, although no organization had claimed responsibility at that point. Meanwhile, streets around the affected area were closed to traffic, helicopters hovered overhead, and hundreds of police officers were deployed to contain the panicked crowd and protect other strategic points in the city. Authorities also began searching the entire area for possible new explosive devices, fearing that the attacks were part of something larger. Commercial centers and institutions near the finish line were evacuated, and flights at Boston Logan International Airport were temporarily suspended or redirected. At FBI headquarters in Boston, specialized agents had already begun analyzing images captured by surveillance cameras spread throughout Boylston Street and surrounding areas, in an attempt to identify the perpetrators. Additionally, messages posted on social media by spectators helped the investigative team build an initial picture of what had occurred, with videos and photos capturing the moments before and after the explosions. Witnesses described having seen people carrying large backpacks near the location where the bombs exploded, information that would soon become crucial to the investigation. Many of them mentioned suspicious individuals with unusual behavior, such as avoiding eye contact or appearing nervous amidst the excited crowd. Despite all these clues, there were still no concrete leads about who was behind the attack, and tension increased with every passing minute without clear answers. In Washington, President Barack Obama was immediately informed of the incident and canceled official commitments to closely follow the situation. In an official statement hours later, he classified the event as a brutal act of violence and promised that those responsible would be found and punished. The entire country watched in disbelief the real-time news, and many older Americans recalled similar events, such as September 11, 2001, when fear also gripped the streets. It was only the beginning of a complex investigation, which would require cooperation between multiple federal, state, and local agencies to unravel a crime that shook the soul of the nation. In the first hours after the explosions, the investigation seemed to progress slowly, as there was no claim of responsibility or concrete information about who might be behind the attack. However, a specialized FBI team worked tirelessly analyzing thousands of images captured by surveillance cameras scattered along Boylston Street and in nearby establishments. Among photos of tourists, volunteers, spectators, and runners, two individuals stood out whose behavior caught the attention of investigators. They seemed nervous and avoided looking directly at the cameras. One of them carried a large black backpack, while the other wore a dark cap and walked just behind, observing the surroundings as if evaluating the environment. The images showed that both remained in the area for a few minutes before the explosions and then calmly walked away, showing no surprise or concern about what was happening. These details led the agents to focus their attention on the two men, considering them the main suspects in the tragedy. From that point on, the police intensified the search for any possible identification, cross-referencing facial recognition data, traffic camera records, and even social media profiles that could help reveal the identity of the perpetrators. At the same time, teams searched nearby areas for possible traces left by the criminals, such as fingerprints, abandoned clothes, or other objects related to the bombs. Investigators also discovered that the two bombs were made using pressure cookers, a model commonly used in homemade explosives, indicating that the perpetrators had some technical knowledge about weaponry. Furthermore, the devices were reinforced with nails and metal balls, increasing their destructive potential and causing severe injuries to those closest. This brutal characteristic made the case even more shocking, as it clearly showed that the attack was not only meant to scare, but to kill and maim as many people as possible. Meanwhile, hundreds of federal agents and local police began questioning residents of the area and visitors who had been present, seeking any additional information about the suspects. Despite the large volume of work, the names of the culprits remained unknown, and the tension in the city continued to rise, now under constant surveillance. But just a few hours later, a new clue emerged. A clearer image of one of the suspects, obtained from a security camera in a nearby store, would prove crucial in solving the mystery. With this photo released to the public, the search for the perpetrators entered a new phase, marked by a race against time to prevent further attacks and locate those responsible for the crime. On the morning of April 18th, just 3 days after the attacks, authorities finally achieved a crucial breakthrough. The faces of the suspects were identified and made public, thanks to images collected from surveillance cameras and the exhausting work of digital analysis. The FBI managed to associate the two men seen carrying the backpacks with the names of Tamerlan Tsarnaev and his younger brother, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev. The two were American citizens of Chechen origin, having immigrated to the United States with their family a few years earlier. Tamerlan, the older one, was 26 years old at the time and was known for having a history of aggressive behavior and for expressing radical ideas in videos posted on social media. He had previously drawn the attention of the FBI during an investigation in 2011, when Russian agents warned U.S. authorities about possible connections he had with extremist groups. Dzhokhar, on the other hand, was only 19 years old, was studying at the University of Massachusetts, and appeared to lead a normal life, attending parties, posting photos on social media, and staying in touch with friends. Nevertheless, later investigations would reveal that he had been increasingly radicalized in the months prior to the attack, influenced by his older brother's ideas. With the suspects' faces made public, the search took on national proportions, with police teams sweeping neighborhoods, interrogating acquaintances, and analyzing digital records to find clues about the whereabouts of the two. Many residents of Boston and surrounding areas began following the news closely, fearing that the terrorists could be anywhere, ready for new attacks. The climate of tension grew with every hour without concrete news, and the city lived under constant vigilance, with schools closed and public events canceled as a precautionary measure. Authorities also began investigating possible international links, trying to understand whether the young men had received support from terrorist organizations or had acted alone, inspired by extremist ideologies. During these investigations, it was discovered that Tamerlan had spent 6 months in Russia the previous year, raising suspicions of contacts with radical groups. However, there was no concrete evidence that he had been formally trained or integrated into any specific terrorist cell. On the other hand, messages found on Dzhokhar's social media suggested that he was increasingly involved with radical religious texts and sympathized with extremist movements. Thus, it became clear that the two brothers, although seemingly integrated into American society, had been developing a meticulous and deadly plan that would culminate in a desperate confrontation on the streets of Boston. With the suspects' faces made public, the search took on national proportions, with police teams sweeping neighborhoods, interrogating acquaintances, and analyzing digital records to find clues about the whereabouts of the two. Many residents of Boston and surrounding areas began following the news closely, fearing that the terrorists could be anywhere, ready for new attacks. The climate of tension grew with every hour without concrete news, and the city lived under constant vigilance, with schools closed and public events canceled as a precautionary measure. Authorities also began investigating possible international links, trying to understand whether the young men had received support from terrorist organizations or had acted alone, inspired by extremist ideologies. During these investigations, it was discovered that Tamerlan had spent 6 months in Russia the previous year, raising suspicions of contacts with radical groups. However, there was no concrete evidence that he had been formally trained or integrated into any specific terrorist cell. On the other hand, messages found on Dzhokhar's social media suggested that he was increasingly involved with radical religious texts and sympathized with extremist movements. Thus, it became clear that the two brothers, although seemingly integrated into American society, had been developing a meticulous and deadly plan that would culminate in a desperate confrontation on the streets of Boston. In the evening of April 18, 2013, just 1 day after the identification of the suspects, a new wave of panic swept through the Boston area when the Tsarnaev brothers were spotted in Watertown, a suburb of the city. Everything began around 10:30 p.m., when Dzhokhar and Tamerlan, already armed and desperate, entered into a confrontation with officers from the Watertown Police Department during an attempted vehicle theft. The police noticed suspicious movement and decided to approach the driver of a car that appeared to be observing the area without apparent reason. It was Dzhokhar Tsarnaev. Upon realizing the police were approaching, the two brothers opened fire on the officers, initiating an intense gunfight that echoed through the quiet streets of that early morning. During the exchange, the terrorists threw improvised grenades and fired repeatedly at the officers, endangering not only law enforcement but also local residents. Tamerlan Tsarnaev was shot during the gunfire and eventually fell to the ground, seriously injured, while his brother Jakar, also wounded, managed to flee at high speed in the stolen car. The police temporarily halted the pursuit to provide medical assistance to Tamerlan, who was lying on the pavement, bleeding heavily. He was rushed to Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center but did not survive his injuries and was declared dead a few hours later. With this, only Jakar remained, who had escaped amid the chaos, becoming the main target of authorities in one of the largest manhunts in recent U.S. history. Meanwhile, Tamerlan's body was examined by investigators looking for possible clues, including DNA samples, messages, and other traces that might help better understand the attacker's plans. Witnesses later reported that before being shot, Tamerlan had shouted words in Arabic during the gunfire, reinforcing the idea that his motivation was ideological. The police then began combing the entire area for Jakar, blocking roads, searching homes, and keeping hundreds of officers on high alert. Helicopters equipped with thermal cameras flew over the region, searching for any sign of the fugitive, who could be hiding anywhere. Tension increased with each passing minute, and the entire city watched in shock the unfolding events, fearing that new explosions or attacks could occur at any moment. But no one imagined that Jakar Tsarnaev's capture would happen unexpectedly, inside a boat abandoned in a common backyard in Watertown, a scene that would become one of the most dramatic moments of the case. On the morning of April 19, 2013, less than 24 hours after the gunfight in Watertown, authorities continued searching the area for Jakar Tsarnaev, the young man who had escaped in the car during the shootout. With the city on maximum alert, residents were instructed to remain indoors while teams of police, SWAT units, and federal agents searched houses, backyards, and even sewers for any trace of the fugitive. The operation involved hundreds of armed officers, armored vehicles, sniffer dogs, and drones equipped with thermal cameras to detect human movement in dark or enclosed spaces. Many neighborhoods in Watertown were completely blocked off, and helicopters constantly patrolled the skies, transmitting live footage to command centers spread across the area. Despite the massive mobilization, hours passed without any concrete information about Jakar's location, fueling fears that he might be preparing another attack. But around 6:45 p.m., an unexpected event changed the course of the hunt. A resident of Dexter Street noticed that his boat had been damaged and saw bloodstains on the side of the hull. The man immediately called the police, reporting what had happened and saying he had seen someone moving inside the boat moments before arriving home. Quickly, specialized teams surrounded the location and positioned ballistic shields, while negotiating with the figure hidden inside the small aluminum boat. Jakar, injured, tired, and visibly shaken, appeared partially covered by a blue tarp, holding a weapon and seeming disoriented in front of the crowd of officers pointing their guns at him. Without offering armed resistance, he was removed from the boat and handcuffed, met with cheers and celebration from the officers who finally succeeded in ending the dangerous chase. At the time of his arrest, Jakar showed signs of gunshot wounds, cuts on his body, and blood on his back, likely caused during the previous night's gunfight. He was immediately taken to Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, where he received medical treatment under heavy police guard. In the hours that followed, authorities officially confirmed that the last terrorist responsible for the Boston Marathon bombing had been captured, bringing to a close one of the most tense manhunts in the city's recent history. Thousands of people watched the live images of Jakar's arrest and celebrated on social media and in the streets, relieved to know the immediate danger had passed. However, although the young man was now in custody, the country still had to face the profound consequences left behind by that tragic April 15th. With Jakar Tsarnaev in custody, a wave of relief swept through Boston and the entire country, which had lived through days of constant tension since the marathon attack. The news was broadcast nationwide, with live transmissions showing images of the hospital where the young man was hospitalized under police custody. In an official statement, Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick said, "The safety of the community is restored, and praised the work of law enforcement for their efficiency and courage during the operation. Boston Mayor Thomas Menino also spoke, stating that the worst has already passed, and that the city would begin rebuilding from that moment forward. Residents of Boston took to the streets to celebrate, hugging each other, singing the national anthem, and displaying American flags as gestures of unity and resilience. Many of those present at the finish line days earlier cried upon learning that those responsible were now in custody. On social media, messages of gratitude to police and federal agents multiplied, with hashtags like #BostonStrong and #JusticeForBoston going viral on Twitter and Facebook. The arrest of Jakar also had a significant international impact, with world leaders commenting on the outcome of the investigation and expressing solidarity with the victims of the attack. Although the dominant feeling was relief, many remembered that the real battle was yet to come, the trial of the young terrorist. Legal authorities warned that the process would be long and complex, involving testimonies from hundreds of witnesses, analysis of technical evidence, and debates over the maximum applicable sentence. While in the hospital, Jakar remained under constant surveillance, with no access to phones or unauthorized visits, as he awaited transfer to a federal prison. His lawyers would step in during the following days, attempting to build a defense aimed at avoiding the death penalty, something that, given the severity of the crime, seemed unlikely. At the same time, families of the victims demanded strict justice, emphasizing that the young man knew exactly what he was doing when he planted the bombs that took innocent lives. At the same time, voices emerged calling for reflection on how two young men seemingly integrated into American society could reach such a violent extreme. This question would echo for years, fueling debates about radicalization, social integration, and national security in the United States. In September 2014, just over a year after the Boston Marathon bombing, Jakar Tsarnaev was formally charged by a federal grand jury with 30 crimes, including use of a weapon of mass destruction and conspiracy to kill people. The trial officially began in March 2015 at the U.S. District Court in Boston, with a rigorous jury selection that lasted weeks, as authorities sought to ensure impartiality in light of national outrage. During the first days of the process, prosecutors described in brutal detail how the bombs were built, where they were placed, and the damage they caused to victims. Graphic images of the explosions, survivor testimonies, and medical reports were presented to the jury, reminding everyone of the suffering experienced on that fateful day. Jakar's defense team, led by lawyer Judy Clark, known for defending notorious criminals, such as the Arizona Jeep kidnapper, argued that he had been influenced by his older brother, Tamerlan, and tried to avoid the death penalty. They also highlighted that Jakar was young at the time of the crime, only 19 years old, and that his role was secondary compared to Tamerlan's ideological leadership. Despite this, the judge emphasized Jakar's direct responsibility, noting that he helped assemble the bombs, participated in choosing the location, and was present during the attacks. Emotional witnesses took the stand, including family members of the deceased, survivors who lost limbs, and even children who were near the finish line. One of the most impactful moments of the trial came when Karen Broussard, one of the injured victims, showed her amputated leg to the court and said, "I can't hide this. You can't hide what you did either." Faced with such emotional and legal pressure, Jakar decided to speak publicly for the first time during the trial, apologizing to the victims but not fully accepting guilt. He claimed to have been misled by his brother's ideas and said that he now understood the mistake he had made. However, many considered his words insufficient in light of the gravity of the facts. In June 2015, after weeks of testimony and debate, the jury concluded the trial phase and declared Jakar Tsarnaev guilty of all 30 federal charges he faced. With this, the case entered its final stage, the decision on sentencing, which would determine whether he would receive life imprisonment or the death penalty, something rare in the U.S. in federal cases. At the same time, public opinion was divided. Many called for severe justice, demanding the execution of the young man, while others advocated for reflection on the penal system and the possibility of redemption. But regardless of position, one thing was certain. The final verdict would seal forever the fate of the man who had, in the eyes of the world, become the face of domestic terrorism in the United States. In July 2015, after months of testimony, debate, and intense emotion, the moment most awaited arrived. The sentencing decision for Dzhokhar Tsarnaev. The jury, composed of 12 members and 2 alternates, unanimously recommended the death penalty, considering the crime extremely cruel, premeditated, and involving multiple innocent victims. It was a historic decision, as the federal death penalty in the U.S. is rare and applied only in cases of extreme severity. In January 2020, however, a federal court overturned the sentence, arguing that the jury selection process had not been rigorous enough to guarantee impartiality. This generated great controversy, especially among the families of victims, who saw the decision as a possible chance for the young man to escape death. But in March 2022, the U.S. Supreme Court reversed the previous ruling, reinstating the death penalty for Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, sealing his fate. Today, he remains imprisoned on death row in a federal prison in Colorado, awaiting the execution of the sentence, something that may take years or even decades to occur. Meanwhile, Boston moved forward, but never forgot that tragic day. The phrase "Boston Strong" became a national symbol of resilience, unity, and recovery. The city rebuilt the affected area, strengthened security measures at public events, and created support programs for victims and their families. Many survivors became advocates for social causes, using their stories to warn about the dangers of extremism and the importance of human solidarity. Additionally, the case served as a landmark for discussions on online radicalization, prevention of domestic terrorist attacks, and the role of social media in spreading extremist ideologies. Although the bombing was a dark chapter in American history, it also demonstrated the strength of the people of Boston and the ability of an entire community to rise in the face of adversity. The world watched the tragedy unfold in disbelief, but was also inspired by how the city handled the trauma, uniting to heal wounds and rebuild lives. And even as the years pass, the legacy of that April day in 2013 continues to live on, in memories, memorials, schools, and even on the streets of Boston, where the spirit of resilience still echoes strongly. Now, it's time for us to reflect together. If you've made it this far, why not leave a comment? Do you agree with the death penalty in this case? How do you think cities should prepare to prevent similar attacks in the future? Share your thoughts, and if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon to get notified about new content. See you next time.